I'm going to kind of start where Prof ended. The whole issue around where are we as a country going, determined very much by where is the world going, determined very much by what, I will not call him names, I'll just call him President Trump. That's what he is. I'm not saying I agree with the fact, I just accept the fact that it currently is. Now, I want you now to think about this. I'm going to lie to you, but I want you to think about the lie I'm about to tell you. Amongst us here is the sympathizer of ISIS. And they have a bomb strapped around them. And they're going to blow up all this group of people in this room. Okay, have you thought about that? I told you it's a lie, but how do you feel? Huh? How do you feel? Very vulnerable. But it is not true that there's an ISIS sympathizer in this room. But suddenly, that statement, simply because I said it, simply the possibility that that statement could be true, has made you very vulnerable, and all of us vulnerable. The march of folly. When we, as citizens and governments and policymakers, make decisions that are contrary to our best interests. Why? Because now Donald Trump could be the best president that could be, but by the simple fact that he makes certain statements like, I'm going to go and nuke ISIS. Well, the problem is that statement has been recorded. And it's being played again and again in the recruitment of an IS sympathizer. Are you feeling uncomfortable? I'm glad. The truth of the matter is that the world politically is no longer what it was before the 20th of January 2017. It's very, very different. Okay, what does he talk about? He's going to build a wall. And everybody excited that all the stuff that he said he'll do when he was actually going out to ask to be elected, the good thing about Donald Trump is that he actually delivers on his promises. Here's the problem. Those are not consequences. Those are just actions. The consequences, unfortunately, it's not going to be for the Americans. It's going to be for all of us. The problem is the ISIS sympathizer is not there. The ISIS sympathizer is everywhere. So you're going to see this good Trump having the effect where safe spaces are no longer safe. He could be right that the US doesn't need China at all, or doesn't need Mexico or Canada or any other country for that matter, because we know that when you think about how much the US depends on China, although all of us here, of course, are dressed up in Chinese clothing, and in that sense we think we are dependent on the Chinese, the truth of the matter is slightly different, that actually when you look at any other economy, most economies are self-contained. When I look at what I spend my money on, it is not on my Chinese clothes, it's actually on my children's education, it's on their health and our health as a family. It is, what is the other big expense? Transportation, infrastructure, so the ability to transport them to school and me to come here and speak to you. And then the last one where we spend most of our money, funny enough, is food. And then you could also include shelter amongst that. That's where we spend most of our money. I rely, whether I like it or not, on the teachers and the nurses and the police and the roads and the trains and the aeroplanes that are physically in South Africa. They could be bought somewhere else, but ultimately they're provided by countries like ourselves. So by and large, when he says America first and he uses that kind of a picture, he says, well, but actually I don't depend on China at all. There's a problem in that statement because, you see, what he forgets is that the US is not as disconnected from any other of these economies as he thinks it is. Unfortunately, you and I are going to suffer in that process. And that's when it actually it gets a little bit uncomfortable. His main challenge, of course, is that he doesn't understand that he actually is built in the same mold as this. That's why I chose that picture. It shows you them with the same kind of gesture because they're exactly the same. When you mess with a man that's like you, see, most people win because there's always almost an asymmetry of how we respond to situations. Xi Jinping has, since he actually was elected, amassed so much power that he actually right now probably more powerful than Donald Trump, not in a military sense, but in the sense of how he controls the Chinese state. And his ability to respond is probably much, much more dangerous than what Trump actually can deliver. Do you remember a book called 1984? What was it about? Well, it's control, but in something that happened after the first day that Trump was elected, he did exactly what actually 1984 speaks about. The ability to change truth and facts. And then we coined a new word, alternative facts. And of course, the Americans will say it's a falsehood. No, it's not a falsehood, it's a lie. The argument around this alternative truths came out of, so who had the biggest inauguration crowd at the park where the inauguration takes place? And then, of course, they say, no, but we're bigger than everybody else. We like to be bigger than everybody else. Then the facts are presented. We don't like the facts. So what do? We say, oh, because the facts tell us that there was a bigger crowd in this instance to this one, we're going to change the basis of our conversation. We're not no longer talking about this instance. We're talking about a different instance where we can include social media, in which case we can't really get back to the facts anymore. So we change the basis on what we base the facts on. Guess what? We've been there before. So when we talk about how bad the Trump is, that actually as South Africans, we know how bad we can actually work against ourselves because we did it in 2008. When President Jacob Zuma became president, we knew who he was. He had 789 charges hanging over him. We knew that. We knew he was a polygamist. Actually, Nkandla was already there, by the way. He didn't start it after he became president. So the facts about how Trump is going to pan out, and this is where the whole concept of actually us working against our own interests becomes very, very real. We know what we voted for. And so do the Americans, unfortunately. Although they might deny it, they will argue in law it is legitimate. No, that's not the issue. It's not about legitimacy. The other example is, as Prof has said, we think the office will change them. No, the office doesn't change them. It accentuates because now they actually have the power of the state to do that which they couldn't do, or they could do marginally before they were actually in power. So what's going to happen to South Africa in 2017? What's going to happen to Jacob Zuma? What's going to happen to the ANC? Who's going to win the elections in 2019? Then, of course, there's Brexit. We have no idea what actually Brexit means. The English have no idea what Brexit means, so why do we care? The fact that Brexit hasn't happened, of course, could be an opportunity, but what it actually talks about, it talks to the fact that actually, while we think we know what has happened, with Trump we know, of course, we have an idea, but actually we have no clue what Brexit means for us economically and for us politically whatsoever. Now, the challenge, of course, is that when you're coming with a plan, you're then looking for easy wins. As we speak, I think she's on her way. I don't think she's a rat. She's going to Washington, and she's going to speak to Donald Trump. And the real gist of what she wants to achieve by going to speak to Donald Trump is because she believes that the US and the UK must become the leaders of the world that they were in the days gone by. Well, the world has changed. It's not only because of China, it's because countries like South Africa exist. You might not agree with South Africa, but South Africa will say, we've been in the Security Council twice, we matter. It is the role of leaders to put words, to define what it is that I think certain decisions have been made. When the British people voted in the referendum last year, they did not simply vote to withdraw from the EU, they voted to change the country, to how the country works. But they didn't. The question was very simple. Do we move or do we stay? So what she's now doing, and that's her job as a leader, is to put words into what actually Brexit is and what it should represent. But a lot of things being read into that which might not be true, and unfortunately, go back to the March of Folly. What is likely to happen in December, as I've already indicated, and I've started out by saying that he's not here by accident, we put him there because we forgot that for us to be able to get a different outcome, we need to be cognizant of the fact that the decision makers in all these decisions, by and large, are not necessarily in the forums where we expect them to do or where a lot of things are being said, which are correct and knowledgeable. They happen elsewhere. Will he be our next president? No, definitely not. Why? So the first one about will be the president of the ANC, it's a much more difficult one to answer in a sense that I think the ANC can make decisions that are contrary to what they can do. They have no constitution that says he can't serve for more than 3 terms. But the good news is he will not be the president of South Africa come 2019. That's a fact. So I feel very good about where South Africa is going, because that I think it's a very, very positive thing. The only thing is, how do we make sure that that transition leads us to a different outcome from the one that we had before, when we chose somebody knowing very well who he was, and therefore he didn't change in office. So a la Trump, but more a la him. So the biggest challenge for us in terms of what kind of South Africa we want beyond 2017 has to be focused on us focusing on what is the kind of leadership that we want. And it can't be somebody like him. When we talk about who's going to be our next leader, I always say that one of the beauties of South Africa, unlike the Democrats, by the way, which is another interesting dynamic in the US, is that the Democrats find themselves in a very difficult position. They have nobody to lead them. At the top are the kind of obvious people that always think of as the possibilities of the next president of South Africa, Gwede Mantashe, Kgalema Motlanthe, except now he's now come out and says, please don't recycle me, which is incredibly brave of him, and I think we should, again, honor him. That says something about us as South Africans in a way, that we actually have people like that who will say, hey, my time has come and gone, and I need to step back and let other people. So I could scratch him. There's Baleka Mbeta, and then, of course, there's Zwelim Kized, and then there's Cyril Ramaphosa, and then, of course, there's Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Those are the ones that people talk about as potential president of South Africa. The interesting thing, of course, that most of them actually serve in the ANC, in the NEC of the ANC, except for Jesse Duarte. So all the top guys in the ANC, NEC are appearing there. There are other people that I think are quite interesting. I deliberately, of course, put Musma Iman. I don't think he's going to be president in 2019, and that's not the reason why I'm putting it there. Or Julius Malema, for that matter. But the interesting about South Africa, unlike the Democrats, that we have an enormous group of people to choose from. So one of the things I think is interesting about our country is the fact that young people are coming to the fore to become interested in the leadership of the country. Some of the names you might know, such as David Makura, there's Paul Mashatile, there's Lindiwe Sisulu. The interesting challenge, though, is this, is that the same way you'd struggle with the conceptualizing a young person leading this country is exactly the problem that the ANC has. For the ANC to have a different path in terms of how it's going to lead the country into the future, because I think it still will lead the country into the future, and I'll come back to that, is that they must accept that to become a leader of the ANC, you don't have to have gone to exile, you don't have been in Robben Island, and you shouldn't be over 60. Then to Prof's point, because people say, wow, and a friend of mine said to me, the students are anarchic, and they point out to a South Africa that is actually on remote control. It doesn't know where it's currently going. What it tells you about us as South Africans is that we can choose a lousy president, but number one, we'll accept that we did it, and we'll try to do something different about it. And more important, that we have a group of young people and young leaders who will not accept the status quo, whether it's a corrupt South Africa or a South Africa that marginalizes its people. The interesting thing is, of course, this little country had a guy who wanted to stay in power, Yahya Jammeh. And the interesting thing, of course, that talking about how Africa has now come to accept the responsibility to do things differently, is that immediately ECOWAS started to say, hey, not in our backyard. You can't, as a country like Senegal, which literally could obliterate Gambia by itself, because it's militarily and economically much bigger, it could not act unilaterally. It had to actually act within the context of its neighborhood and actually in the global community, because it wasn't just that ECOWAS became involved. For them to actually get involved, they actually had to go to the UN and say, can we actually take care of this guy? And then towards the end, and I'm sure my colleague later will speak about issues of the economy, the good news is we are also in good space. So yes, South Africa's economy is not growing at the rates that it might be growing, which creates the stability and the ability to fund all these requirements that we have, including things like education. But by and large, our economies are doing quite okay, thank you very much. I think Donald Trump is going to actually mess up with that, but that's, for now, it is a good picture, and that's where I want to end. You ask me questions.